Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about an issue that in American parlance, it's referred to as grade inflation, whether at high school or particularly at university. And there's been various articles floating around, and I've seen a few of them, so I thought, well, this is probably worth commenting on. This is an amalgamation of several articles and online, vids and so on that I've seen about grade inflation, and the extent of it is anyone that's watching this area or is concerned about the undermining and the subverting of education in the Western world, and it's happening all over the Western world simultaneously. It's not just in the United States, or not just in Australia or Britain. It's happening all over the place. There are some countries that are doing a better job of resisting the subversion of the education system, but it's a rearguard action. The woke, the globalist woke sort of brigade and cabal, they're pushing this very hard and with much determination. So it's been, I think, impossible to really fully resist it. And there's only an isolated handful of private schools that still perceive merit as being important, and those schools are under constant harassment and attack by the woke brigade to get them to join in the program of mass subversion of education. Now, I'm old enough to remember the days when merit-based education, like strictly pass or fail tests, merit-based education, and so on, were how things were done. And it's been within my lifetime, in fact, within my time at school, is the subversion process, diversity, equity, inclusion, equity, and affirmative action began. The process sort of began in those days. So I had some experience of it just as I was coming to the tail end of high school. It hadn't penetrated university really back then, although there were special courses that were, in the sociology area, like, peace studies and, racial studies, things like that. They were gender studies. They were obviously, very low bar, nobody failed them and that sort of thing. But the mass subversion that later on took hold hadn't arrived at this point. Now, when you look at, say, Harvard, the amount of, A grades Harvard used to give out 50 years ago, for example, to the amount of A grades Harvard gives out today. Now, depending on whose numbers you look at, Harvard are giving out 20 times more A grades today than they did before. 50 times more B plus grades, and so on and so forth. So everyone today is a superstar student. Hardly anybody fails, and everybody gets what's equivalent really to a participation trophy rather than an actual grading of their academic capability or scholastic capability. Now, there was a close relationship, certainly when I was a kid, there was a close relationship between people that studied hard, worked hard. Not that there weren't some naturally bright kids. There were kids that I knew who, like, thinking back now, they had pretty much a photographic memory or close to it, and they had advantages there. There were kids that had parents that were very concerned about their education and would provide all facilities. I'm just thinking here, one kid, his parents had bought him a proper desk, and he had like the filing cabinet and the light, and he had the ergonomic chair. And his parents were, very, very. Oh no, Billy Bob can't come round to, play football tonight, or this afternoon. He's too busy studying, and why don't you fuck off? And so they were very. And there were a number of parents. This is in a fairly sort of upper middle class area. A number of parents. Now, at the time, social mobility was seen very much. It was available to anybody who was bright enough and hard. If you were bright enough and hardworking enough, or charismatic enough, then you could achieve social mobility, and you could go from sort of working class to middle class, lower middle class to upper middle class into the elites, and so on. You could do that purely through your own ability and capability, ingenuity, and so on, sense of industry, intellectual capacity. was very much seen as part of the gig those days. Now, that then in white countries, that tended to suit the most industrious, conscientious people. Those people tended to be all white, or 99.9% of them. So this merit-based social mobility got a bad rap. Now, at the time, social mobility was also available. It was available to anybody technically, but social mobility was available, say, to a ambitious working class woman who would marry a upwardly mobile middle class guy, and then she could realize her dream of becoming like leaving the working class behind and becoming a good middle class. And there used to be things like etiquette lessons that you could go to. I don't know, maybe they still exist. I don't think so. So where working class people, particularly women, but also men too, wanting to break out, could go to these classes to learn how to speak, how to drink a cup of tea and so on, in order to become socially mobile. Now, that type of mobility seems to have gone away now. The mobility people need is, well, I'm an oppressed victim, and you got to give me lots of shit, and through that they become socially mobile today. So it's quite an inversion and subversion of what social mobility used to be. But the key to social mobility was seen as you work hard, you study hard, you're well behaved, and you've got a nice shiny pair of shoes, and you're well presented, and that's it. Social mobility is yours for the taking. The world is at your feet, as they sometimes used to say back then. And to a large extent, it wasn't a perfect system, but bright, hard-working, industrious, people could go places purely on their own merits. But merit was the key word here, merit. And the way you separated people who had that capacity or capability from ones who didn't was the people who came top in the tests, whether it be at the junior high school level, senior high school, university, or entrance exams for particular organisations that in those days used to have entrance exams if you wanted to come work for the company. Some companies had this thing that you had to have a university degree in the sciences, otherwise you couldn't work there. It was just a requirement, and they had a higher standard of people. Generally, they had a much higher standard of people than anywhere else. So I remember visiting a company from. It was in a technology field, and I was the only person in the room that didn't have a master's or a PhD, and I was quite impressed by these people. They all were very professional, very knowledgeable, and because they'd come through a merit-based system, they all had earned their credentials. Nothing was being awarded because they were black lesbians or something like that. Now, coming to the sort of the idea of education, you could separate the capable from the incapable by who was getting the who had the degrees. Now, there were kids who came from poor families and didn't qualify for scholarships, for example, and they may have been bright and and they could still get ahead through a sense of hard work, industry, and spending at their own time, acquiring the knowledge that was specific to their industry or area of employment, and so it was still possible to be socially mobile. I remember a guy who was he worked for one of the car dealerships that was in the same place for like a million years, and then he joined as like a trainee, a sales trainee or something, and then was declared a master salesman, and he'd been with the company the dealership for 40 years longer, and he'd done very well for himself, and had been very successful, and had made a lot of money as a new car salesman, and so it was still possible. And he'd quit school at 14. So again, it was possible to do these things. But it's much easier to achieve, I think, social mobility based on merit, and then you have a goal to shoot for. So if I flunked a test at school, for example, if I flunked a test at school, I knew the solution was that I just hit the books, and I did review. I reviewed my work and did revision work. I did it more often. I had to work harder. I had to read more. I had to go to the library and do the heavy lifting, do the hard yards, and all that sort of thing. That's what I had to do if I wanted to do better in the exam. And so that's what I did, and that's what anyone who wanted to do better did. They had to put the work in. And if they didn't put the work in, then they wouldn't. Now, again, there were some kids with like photographic memories, and they kind of did all right, and they could goof along and still do okay. But if you wanted to be the kids that got noticed and through the exam results and so on, then you had to put that work in. There were kids that were naturally dumb and kids that were naturally bright, and there was those sort of separations. The kids that I think had partial dyslexia, or they couldn't seem to concentrate for more than a few moments at a time, or kids maybe who came from difficult home environments. There were things like that you could consider, but the reality was that in certain areas of town, of the city, suburbs, it tended to be people of like-minded, similar level of professionalism. The parents, what they're employed in doing, it was fairly similar, and so as a result, the outcomes were from kids who were pretty much in that same socioeconomic group anyway. So it wasn't as if it included, kids from the projects where the mother had 50 children by 50 different men, and the whole home life was a drama and ongoing non-stop drama. It wasn't that. Those sort of kids weren't at those sort of schools. But looking at the amount of kids that say passed through, this is my own experience, that passed through junior high school. And in those days, if you weren't passing the test, they came to you and said, look, what are you staying at school for? You're not a good student. You're not learning anything. You're flunking the tests. Why don't you go out and get a job or become a tradesman or something? And this was how it was. So something in the order of 50% of the kids were left at the junior high school. Not only half the kids were getting a junior high school diploma. Today, you look at some of these American high schools, and every kid gets a junior high school diploma, whereas it used to be less than half when it was pass and fail exams. The same thing would be in senior high school, where only less than a third of the kids that started high school actually graduated out of senior high school with a diploma. And a senior high school diploma was considered such you were quite well educated. It was considered, if you'd done senior high school, and they would give you 10% extra on your pay if you had a senior high school diploma. I mean, that seems insane today, but that's how it was then, because it was seen as a meritorious recognition of your capability. There was no affirmative action, or it was just beginning to come in, but there was no affirmative action. Now, I found when I went to the United States for the first time, especially when I was interviewing applicants for jobs in the offices that were being opened by the companies that I worked for, I was surprised that you'd look at someone's CV and they've got 2 degrees, and you go, wow, gee, okay, this dude's a bright dude or woman. And then you'd sit down with them and you'd be talking to them, and you'd realize that they were functionally illiterate, or minimally literate. They maybe had a level of literacy that would be, say, junior primary school, a couple of years out of kindergarten type level literacy. And how could you have 2 degrees? And this was when my first exposure to affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion degrees. In order to create social equality, well, let's just give everybody a degree. Let's give everybody a master's. Let's give everybody a PhD, and then we have equality. No, that's not how it works. So that means you can't tell the person who's meritoriously achieved from the person who, just on paper, the person who's been gifted an affirmative action degree. And as I've done a number of interviews with engineering graduates, civil engineering graduates, and the straight white males are still achieving, still gaining their degrees on merit. But pretty much every minority, there was an exception. There was this Argentinian guy. I think he had achieved it on merit, and a Japanese guy. But pretty much everyone else, all the minorities, especially brown and black and that lesbians, all that sort of stuff, the proverbial black lesbian. None of them had achieved their degrees on merit, not even slightly, not even minimally. They had all been gifted the degrees. So we've got a situation where 3% of kids used to be the only ones that would make it into university, and out of those, over a third of them would drop out. They just couldn't hack it. The university, the rigor of the education was so much they just couldn't cope. So you're looking at less than 2% of kids that started high school went on to university and completed university. Less than 2%. Whereas in parts of Australia today, they're now pushing almost 50% of kids are finishing university with a degree who started high school, and they want to increase that to 60%. Now, the only way you can do that is lower the bar and lower the bar and lower the bar and keep on lowering the bar. That is giving out diversity degrees and affirmative action degrees. Lower the bar so that you hit that number. There is no way possible ever in the universe to have 60% of the people highly educated in the same way that a merit-based system would produce. It just doesn't happen. There's not that many bright people in the world, nor will there ever be. So the only way you can get this equity thing is to lower the bar, and in this case, whether it be in high school or university. But some of the disturbing statistics out of the United States, to whatever extent you can rely on them, are that the wage rates and the unemployment rates for people with university degrees, and this, it didn't separate diploma degree from full degree, but nonetheless, university degrees with people that flunked out of junior high school, they're saying the unemployment rates are comparable and the wage rates are comparable. So the college kid with the big loans and the student debt is competing for jobs as like a barista or something with someone who quit school at flunked out of junior high school. They're comparable, the outcomes. And now within 5 minutes of talking to someone at an interview, I can work out whether they got an affirmative action degree, gifted an affirmative action, or whether they've earned it. And pretty much, not all, but in most instances, you can tell the straight white guy earned it. But in nearly every instance, you can tell that the minority person was gifted it, and you can tell that again within a few minutes of the conversation. It doesn't even have to be a job interview; just chatting to somebody. You can tell that pretty quickly. So, what's to be done about? Because the subversion is all levels now. It's all across the education system. It's all across government employment, affirmative action employment, diversity quotas in the workplace. It's now become an omnipresent value system where merit is not only frowned upon, but is no longer recognizable in the miasma of all these affirmative action participation trophies. I don't know how we can unwind from that as in the Western sphere, how we're going to unwind from that with anything other than just reverting back to hardcore merit at all levels and in all ways. Now, that means we're going to go back to winners and losers, and very clear and stark winners and losers. Whereas the activists, even back in the day, when I first started noticing this, when I was a teenager, I began noticing these murmurs and rumblings of equity, let's get equal outcomes and this sort of thing. The idea was to create a social paradise where nobody would feel bad by not coming first. That was sort of the general view that was expressed. People who don't come first feel bad. Why should we allow anyone to come first if anyone else may feel bad about not coming first? So what we'll do is we'll make a system where everybody comes first, and it's childish and ridiculous and absurd and very communist and so on. But you can kind of see the thing. Let's be nice to everybody. Let's say everybody come first. But the reality, of course, is quite different. I want to be able to go to a doctor who is fully qualified meritoriously, or a surgeon who's going to do heart surgery or something, brain surgery, whatever, and they are the best in their field and proven to be so meritoriously. I don't want to sort of have to ask a doctor, are you an affirmative action doctor? Oh, okay. Did you pass the test? Not really. Are they gifted to you because you're a black lesbian? Do you mind not operating on me? Is that okay? I mean, do you want to have to go through that, or at any level? Is the person who's going to fix your car? Do they know what they're doing? The guy building the people building the bridge? Do they know what they're doing, or building the road, or any civil works infrastructure stuff? This is you want the best doing that. Now, it may not. I may feel bad, or someone may feel bad that they're not the best. I didn't come first in every subject at school, but it didn't worry me. I didn't care. Like, it wasn't like I fixated on it. Would I have liked to come first? Well, yeah, I guess, but the guy who came first put the work in that I didn't put in, and I realized that difference. If I wanted to come first, then I had to put that work in. Would I still have come first? Maybe not. Maybe that kid was just a bit brighter than me, and that's fine too. I accept that. And again, that's the guy, the bright kid who came first. I want him to be the heart surgeon that operates in my heart when I'm in hospital. I want that guy to be doing it, and I want it to be meritorious. He recognized that he was the best. Was I as smart as him? Well, maybe not, but who cares? I still want him to be at the apex of that profession, be it surgery, or be it building the bridge, or building the fucking space rocket to Mars, or whatever it might be. I want the best people, the most capable, meritoriously determined people to be working on that. And then that's better for everybody in the end, no matter how hurt my feelings may or may not have been. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.